afternoon and welcome once again to the Alumni Special. My name is Dilly MacFarlane, your host for today's program, and I'm very pleased to welcome today two editors, Janet Potty-Murray, who was formerly the editor of the Vincentian, our first university newspaper, and her daughter Suellen Murray, a current student and presently the editor of our Picaro. I'm interested in knowing, first of all, Janet, this is a very special year for the Picaro, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed. Actually, the Vincentian, which was the first newspaper, as you mentioned, at the Mount, and of which I was editor, came into being in October of '55. And so it's 30 years since then, and Suellen, my daughter, is now the editor in '85. So it's a 30-year anniversary. That's a pretty special one.
It really is. And I suppose you've seen lots of changes taking place in the university particularly, but most of all, I would say, in the newspaper. What are some of the changes that you've noticed, Janet?
Well, of course, the major change was that we were starting out in '55, and we actually had to convince people that the university needed a newspaper. It was a very small university then. Most of us who were involved in writing had been involved with the yearbook and that sort of thing. But in my senior year, I was a journalism student as well. It seemed to me that it was important that we should have the opportunity to at least try a newspaper. We had no money, very little support. We convinced the secretarial department that they should lend us their Gestetner, and that's how we ran off our first paper.
That's pretty well how you do it today, is it, Suellen?
Oh, just about. The budget's just a tiny bit larger, but basically that's the same idea.
So you are funded through the student union?
Yeah, we're funded through the student union. We, when we decided to make the changes this year, we didn't want to do it completely forgetting the last 30 years, especially with my mother looking over my shoulder. So every week we've been running the Diamond Memories column, and the first column we pointed out that life didn't begin in '85 for the Picaro. It started 30 years ago. But the principle's the same. We felt students should have a voice, time to write, time to voice their opinions. We still have trouble convincing some people that we deserve a newspaper, but it's working out pretty well.
Well, you do have a fine newspaper. I know that. I haven't yet seen a copy of the Vincentian. I understand they're very, very rare.
They are indeed, yes.
So perhaps if any of our viewers who are watching do have in their cedar chests or tucked away somewhere copies of school newspapers, perhaps they'll send them in to us. I think that I would be most interesting to see them. How many worked with you on the student newspaper in 1955, Janet?
I think that the first masthead named about 12 to 15 people. Most of us were seniors, but there were a few juniors as well. And they were the people who actually did, they not only did the writing of the paper, but they actually sat down with a typewriter and tried to even out columns and that kind of thing. So it would look a little bit more, just as you do. So it would look a little more like a real newspaper. We were competing at the time, well, sort of competing with the St. Mary's University Journal, which was a fairly slick printed paper. And we took a lot of kidding about that. And in fact, our first issue had a long poem written by one of our writers, Gestetner versus print.
I see. The fine state of the art.
Oh, that's right.
In your studies as a journalism student, I suppose that this was really the perk for you to become involved. Is journalism a family? Are there other journalists in your family besides yourself?
Yes, there are. There are a number of writers in my family. My brother also did journalism. And as it happened, the man that I married's father and mother were both journalists. My father-in-law, George Murray, was the editor of the Pictou Advocate and a former Canadian Press writer as well. And when he died, my mother-in-law, Noni Wallace Murray, took over the Advocate. In fact, my brother-in-law is still involved with that. So, yeah, there's printer's ink in our veins, I think, back for a number of generations.
Now, I know you have a number of lovely children, and I've managed to meet most of them. I understand you have a daughter that's studying at the University of Alberta right now.
That's right, yes. Shannon went to Dalhousie in Halifax, and she's doing her PhD in English at the University of Alberta. Bruce is my second son. He's, people in the Maritimes, I'm sure, will recognize the name of The Press. It's a rock group. They're great. He's the drummer.
She's the PR agent.
Suellen is my third, and Brian, actually, the youngest, is a student here at Mount St. Vincent as well. So that's kind of nice to carry on that tradition too, I think.
I see. Now, speaking of public relations, Suellen, you are a fourth-year student in our public relations program, studying under the co-op option. Where are some of the places that that you're studying in co-op has taken you in Canada?
Well, that was one of the great things about co-op, was that it did take me to other places. I worked in Halifax first for the government, but my second work term I was swept away to Toronto to work for Spar Aerospace, which was wonderful. And then again back to Toronto in the fall of '85 to work for, or the fall of '84 to work for Burson Marsteller. And that's one of the great opportunities. Some people kind of balk at having to move away, but it's wonderful. Co-op is a terrific option, and it really gives you the opportunity to apply what you're doing. I love to write. I did a lot of writing, but did it beyond my academic studies, so I'm really, I think, better prepared for when I graduate.
Well, you sound as though you're ready to hit the job market with some good experience.
Well, after another year, I think I'll be quite ready for it.
Oh, that's fine. When will you graduate, Suellen?
I'll be actually 30 years after my mother. It'll be class of '86. Next September, I'll be giving up the Picaro in April, which will be sad, but there are lots of capable people waiting to take over. So then I think I'll decide what I'll do from then.
Well, I know that if you follow in your mother's footsteps in all regards, and I think that you probably could do no better, that you will become an active alumni, I hope. And I know that your mother has been a very active alumna. I know that you have been involved in any number of things. Beginning as a student, you were a representative on the Board of Governors.
Actually, as an alumna, that was my
Oh,
first.
I see,
In those days, we didn't have student representation to the board. My involvement at university was mostly in fields of writing, public speaking, and drama as well. But I did become involved in the alumni immediately I graduated. I just hated to break the ties with them out, to be perfectly honest. And I became the alumni representative to the Board of Governors. And eventually I chaired the Board of Governors for 3 years. So I'm sort of still here, still coming back.
Well, I hope that continues to be a family tradition as well. I wanted to ask both of you, I know that the newspaper game can be a very exciting one, and I wanted to ask both of you, first of all, Suellen, what so far has been your most exciting story that you've come up with, the most exciting event that you've covered as a editor of the Picaro?
Well, it's kind of difficult. Some of the most exciting were exciting for a bit of the wrong reason. I think controversy is probably a better word, which is exciting in itself, and it certainly teaches you how to deal with it. The Jubilee this year gave us a lot of opportunity. We did a lot on the gala this week, and it gave us a chance to kind of branch out to get to know other departments in the university. There's a lot going on in universities these days. Funding cuts, student loans are big catchwords for journalists. So that's the kind of things we've been following up. I try to kind of keep my hand out of writing, but as Mother said about the printer's ink, it's really difficult. But it's really good to get a good story idea and be able to trust a reporter to take it and work with it from then. So it's been an exciting year all around. Education is something that's really big now, and people support student newspapers in a way I don't think they ever did before.
I see. One question I thought I would ask you, Suellen, is that I know that you are linked to a national press syndicated press line. What news agency is that?
It's called Canadian University Press, or CUP, and we have an Atlantic region, which is our CUP, which I'm one of the vice presidents of. And it's a great opportunity. We get their newspapers every week, so we see what Brandon's doing, and Brandon sees what Victoria's doing, and they see what the Picaro's doing, which is one reason we are trying to bring up the Picaro to have a higher profile, because it does reach across Canada. And it's great belonging to a university association. We meet every few weeks or every few months, and you say, well, we're having problems with funding. They say, gee, we are too, and this is what we've done. So you don't feel so isolated. At the Mount, where we're small, there would be a tendency to feel we're on our own. But there's the College of Cape Breton, who's smaller. So it's a terrific network.
I see. What is your circulation, Suellen?
It's 2,500, and most of that is in Halifax, Dallas, St. Mary's, and Tons, but we also send it across Canada. And we'd like to increase it. My brother, who's a distribution manager, has been telling us they're really hard to come by the end of the week, which makes us very happy. So we try and reach as many people as possible, and we're getting a lot of positive feedback about it, which is terrific. There are times at 3 o'clock in the morning where that's what you really need.
You have a wonderful team, Suellen. I know that you also have a co-editor,
Eduardo
Espero.
Yeah,
yes.
He's been working on that. We have Shelley Murphy, our news editor, and Sheila Allen, our production manager, who's been fantastic. and a lot of new students who have done really well. It's a little bit intimidating writing for a newspaper, and they're a little nervous about seeing their byline, but once they do, they want 10 copies for mom and 16 for their grandmother. And it's a terrific opportunity, especially for PR students, to get their stuff in print and get used to seeing it. It makes a big difference to their portfolio, too, when they graduate.
I'm sure. Now, do you accept letters from alumni, for instance? Would that be something that would be welcome?
Yeah, we'd really appreciate that because, again, especially with the Jubilee, we want to enforce the fact that, yes, there was life before we came here and there are more things going on. We'd love letters to the editor.
Oh, that's great. Janet, what, when you were editing the Vincentian, what were some of the exciting stories that you were covering at that time?
Well, the most exciting story for us was the Vincentian itself. I think the very fact that we were able to get it off the ground. And in fact, someone, the Mail Star, the Halifax paper, picked it up and quoted me as having said that we hoped it would take its place with the great student newspapers of the world. It has, Suellen, I'm sure that's true. The other things I think that we tended to do, things were a lot different 30 years ago. We weren't as controversial as perhaps the Picaro is now. But we tried to deal with some of the problems that we saw on campus. They were very small when I look back at them now, but to us, I guess they seem fairly major. And also with our great competition in those days with the St. Mary's University and the Journal.
Janet, I know that you've had a career in journalism outside of Mount St. Vincent. Where did that career take you here in the local area?
Well, first of all, to the Halifax Mail Star, and then after that, I was Public Relations Director at St. Mary's University for 2.5 years, and then I went to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And I worked there first in their information services, and then later in Farm and Fisheries, where I did consumer items on radio, and I was a production assistant in radio as well. And then I freelanced, actually, through the years as well.
While you were looking after your children at home?
Yeah.
I see.
Encouraging them to go to the Mount.
That's right, yes.
Well, we're awfully glad you did, that's for sure. What's in store for the Picaro? Anything special coming up now that the Jubilee is over, Suellen? Anything in mind?
Well, this year, as I tell everybody who's overworked at the Picaro, is a real turnaround year for us. We've changed the look of it. We're trying to get back on our feet financially. So I think we've set a really high standard, and I think maintaining that standard is one big thing. We're looking forward to more features and to issues that we think concern students outside the university, like South Africa, like tuition payments across Canada, that kind of thing.
I saw your article on the South African article. It was excellent.
We feel that the student newspaper is a way that you can bring to localize the story to the student's level. They may not understand economic sanctions by a country, but they'll understand that the corner store is not going to carry South African products, and that brings it home a little bit, and I think that that's part of our mandate.
And most definitely. I was really very impressed. The masthead is quite different this year,
Yes,
isn't
it looks very different. I should have worn my T-shirt with the masthead on it.
I have a T-shirt as well.
Oh, that's right.
Yes,
Well, we felt that it would be nice if people could look at it and say, wow, it looks different, maybe it reads different. We try not to change it too much. We want people to still recognize it, but we felt it was time for a brand new look, and it seems to be working really well.
The image of the newspaper is sharp. It's a good, it's a well-produced publication.
Well, I think it's in keeping with the image of the university too, which gets more and more respect every year. People recognize what it has to offer.
Well, that's interesting that we're hearing basically the same thing being said in a perspective 30 years apart. I know that there's some things that never change, and I know that Suellen, when she's graduating from the Mount, will look back on this as a very positive experience, I'm sure. And I've heard, Janet, I've heard you speak to groups and say before that your experience at university can be very rewarding, but you must get involved. And I think Suellen is a good example of that kind of involvement. So before I take a moment to thank Janet and Suellen for joining us, I would like our viewers to feel free to write to us here at the Mount to let us know what your response has been to our Alumni Special Series.